Harper never believed in the stories about what hides beneath the bed. But when her brother Mason vanished without a trace one stormy night, leaving only strange scratches on the floor, Harper knew she had to face the darkness waiting below before it took her to the room. Felt different that night, though I couldn't have explained exactly why at first. It wasn't just colder, it was the kind of cold that seeped into the skin, like standing too close to an open freezer. The air felt heavier too, as though the walls had drawn closer together, pressing in. I lay on my bed with a blanket pulled tight to my chin, staring at the faint glow of the ceiling from the small streetlight outside. My bedroom door was shut, as it always was at night. I never liked leaving it open. It made me feel exposed, vulnerable to the hallway shadows. Tonight, even with it closed, I couldn't shake the sense that something was just beyond it, listening. I tried to relax, focusing on the hum of the heater as it cycled on and off. The sound was steady, mechanical, familiar. Then, buried beneath it, something else began to emerge, a faint, irregular noise I almost didn't catch at first. It was soft, like the distant brush of fabric on wood, but it had a pattern. I strained my ears, holding my breath so the sound of it wouldn't drown out what I was hearing. Slowly, it became clearer, a dragging, scraping sound, as though fingernails or claws were lightly raking the floorboards. The sound was coming from directly beneath me. I froze, every muscle locked in place as I stared at the ceiling, unwilling to move my head. I told myself it was just the house settling, the wooden beams shifting with the cold. But the noise didn't sound random, it was too steady, too deliberate. My heart began to beat harder, thudding against my ribs until it was all I could hear for a moment. The scraping stopped, and the silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. It was thick, unnatural, the kind of silence where you can feel something waiting. I kept my eyes fixed upward, but the rest of my senses strained downward. The mattress under me suddenly felt thin, flimsy, almost useless as protection. Then, slowly, another sensation crept in, a smell. At first it was faint, like damp soil after rain, but it grew stronger, sharper, and far more unpleasant. It was the kind of odor that made the back of your throat tighten, like something spoiled, rotting, left too long in the sun. I swallowed hard, my tongue dry, forcing myself not to gag. I thought about looking, about leaning over the side of the bed and peering into the darkness beneath. But the thought alone filled me with a dread so thick it was almost physical. My imagination had already begun to paint shapes down their elongated limbs, pale skin, something staring back. My rational mind whispered that it was nothing, but another, older part of me knew better. Minutes passed. Or maybe it was only seconds, it was impossible to tell. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears that I almost didn't notice the next sound. It wasn't scraping this time. It was a single, precise, and deliberate tap from directly under the mattress. Just one. A small but undeniable reminder that there was something down there. The tap came again, slower this time, as if whatever was beneath me wanted to be sure I noticed. My throat tightened. I didn't move. My breathing had become shallow, controlled, as if any sudden sound from me might provoke a reaction. The smell was stronger now, clinging to the air around my face. The heater clicked off, and the room fell into perfect stillness, except for the faint creak of the bed frame under my own weight. I shut my eyes, though that made it worse. With sight gone, my mind conjured more vivid images. I imagined a thin, bony hand reaching upward through the springs, brushing against the mattress from below. I could almost feel the cold seeping into the underside of the bed, pressing upward toward me. Every instinct told me not to look, not to acknowledge it, because if I met its gaze, it might decide to come out. The silence stretched on, so long I began to wonder if I'd imagined it all. Then, in the stillness, there came one final tap. This one was softer, almost playful, like it knew I was too afraid to move. The next morning, the room looked ordinary again. Sunlight poured through the blinds, cutting across the dust in the air, making it seem impossible that anything had happened just hours earlier. But I couldn't shake the unease. My bed looked exactly as I'd left it, the blanket still twisted from my restless night. Still, I crouched down, telling myself I would feel better once I confirmed there was nothing there. The space beneath was empty, only a few scattered socks, a crumpled magazine, and dust that clung to the wood. Nothing that could explain the noises or the smell. I told myself it had been my imagination, maybe the product of exhaustion, but the thought didn't hold. The memory of that slow, deliberate tapping stayed with me. I pushed it away, going about my day, but every time I was alone, my mind went back to the sound. When night came again, I hesitated at my bedroom door. I thought about sleeping on the couch, but it felt ridiculous to rearrange my whole life over something I couldn't prove. I convinced myself to stay, but left the bedside lamp on, the pale light pooling across the carpet. I lay back, trying to calm the thudding of my heart. The glow should have been comforting, but it only made the shadows look sharper, darker around the edges. It began the same way as before, soft, almost too faint to hear. That dragging sound, like fingertips brushing the floorboards. I froze, my breath catching. The heater was off this time, so the noise was clearer, unmasked. It grew louder, slower, as if something was circling in the narrow space beneath me. I could hear the faint scuff of wood, the rasp of something shifting against the bed frame. I pressed my head deeper into the pillow, trying to convince myself it was just an old piece of furniture settling. But the sound was too close, too deliberate. Then I noticed something new, the faint rustle of fabric, like sheets being touched from underneath. My skin crawled. I thought of the thin mattress, how easily something could press upward through it. The smell came next, just as before. It crept into the room slowly, almost unnoticeable at first, until it thickened the air with that foul, sour, sweet stench. My stomach twisted. I wanted to pull the blanket over my head, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The more I focused, the more I realized I could hear something else breathing. Low-labored, wet breaths that rose up from directly below me. It wasn't the slow rhythm of someone sleeping. It sounded strained, uneven, like each inhale dragged through something thick. My body went rigid. I was suddenly aware of how exposed I was, my legs stretched out toward the end of the bed. Nothing but the thin frame separating me from whatever was underneath. The breathing grew louder, then softer, then louder again, as if it was moving its head closer to the wood, listening to me. Then it happened. The mattress dipped slightly at the bottom, as though something from beneath had pressed upward, just a fraction of an inch, but enough for me to feel it. I could hear the faint creak of the springs adjusting. My hands tightened into fists beneath the blanket, my fingernails digging into my palms. The breathing didn't stop. The weight beneath my feet lingered for a moment, then slowly retreated, the springs shifting back into place. I lay there for what felt like hours, every sound magnified in the silence. My mind raced with explanations I didn't believe: rodents, plumbing noises, vibrations from outside. None of them explained the dip in the bed. None of them explained the smell. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every few minutes I thought I heard the faintest scrape or a shift of weight, just enough to remind me it hadn't gone away. I kept my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to even let my eyelids close. Sometime deep into the night, when the room felt like it had been frozen in stillness for hours, I felt a cold draft snake out from under the bed. It brushed across my ankles like a hand. By the third night, the exhaustion was heavy in my bones. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I couldn't bring myself to get into bed. I lingered in the living room long after midnight, sitting on the couch with the television playing quietly, not even watching the screen. The thought of being in that room, lying over the hollow space where something breathed, made my chest tighten. Still, I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The couch offered no comfort either. Every creak of the building, every shadow in the corner, felt like it was following me from the bedroom. When the first hint of dawn began to lighten the blinds, I told myself I had to check, not just a quick glance like before, but really look. In daylight, things would be different. I gathered a flashlight and knelt on the floor beside the bed. My hands shook as I lifted the blanket edge and lowered myself down to peer into the darkness. The beam cut through the dust, making tiny specks dance in the air. I saw the familiar clutter socks, a shoe I'd forgotten about, a couple of flattened boxes pressed against the wall. But then my light caught something new. There was a streak on the floorboards, in dark, and faintly wet-looking. It stretched from the far side of the bed toward the center. My first thought was that it was water, but the longer I stared, the more it seemed wrong. The wood around it looked darker, almost swollen, like something had seeped in. The streak wasn't smeared the way a spill would be. It was long and unbroken, the kind of trail you might see if something had been dragged. I reached out without thinking, my fingers stopping just short of touching it. A faint, sour smell drifted up from the mark, sharp enough to make me pull my hand back. The streak ended abruptly halfway under the bed, as though whatever made it had simply vanished into the wood. There were no footprints, no continuation, just nothing. I backed away and stood quickly, my heart hammering harder than it should have over a mark on the floor. The logical part of me said it could be anything, leakage from the heater. Maybe, but deep down I knew it wasn't. That knowledge sat in me like a cold stone. All day the image of that streak stayed with me. By the time night came, I felt cornered. I could either sleep somewhere else and spend the whole night wondering if it was still there, or face it directly. Against my better judgment, I returned to the bedroom. I lay down slowly, every creak of the bed frame echoing too loudly in the quiet. The smell wasn't there at first, but the air felt heavy, almost thick enough to touch. I stared at the ceiling, telling myself not to listen for sounds, because once I did, I wouldn't be able to stop, but it didn't matter. I heard it anyway. Not scraping this time, not even the dragging. It was softer, like the slow exhale of something close to the floor. My muscles tensed. The sound grew, not louder exactly, but nearer, like whatever was beneath me was pressing itself against the underside of the bed, listening for movement. Then came a faint shift, and the air changed. A slow, almost rhythmic pulse seemed to come from under me, as though the wood itself was breathing. It was subtle, but I could feel it in my legs through the mattress, a faint rise and fall, far too deliberate to be the wind or the house settling. I lay rigid, afraid to even flex my toes. The pulse continued for what felt like minutes, each one stretching longer than the last. Then, without warning, it stopped. The silence was so complete, I wondered if I'd imagined all of it. But just as that thought formed, I heard a sound I will never forget. faint scraping right beneath my ear, as though something had shifted its weight, dragging slowly across the floor to position itself directly under my head. The nights grew longer, the weight of fear pressing deeper into my bones. I stopped turning off the lights altogether. The soft glow from the lamp cast harsh shadows in the corners of the room, revealing more than I wanted to see. Every night I found myself staring at the space beneath the bed, my mind unable to look away. Shadows shifted there in ways that didn't make sense, moving independently of any light source. Sometimes, I thought I saw a faint bulge in the blanket near the foot of the bed, as if something was pressing upward from underneath, stretching the fabric like an invisible hand pushing against the surface. The smell returned stronger, sour and sickly sweet all at once. It filled the room, making my stomach churn and my throat tighten. I tried opening a window or lighting a candle to mask it, but nothing helped. The odor clung to the air like a second skin. I stopped trying to sleep. Instead, I lay there, eyes wide open, waiting for the inevitable. Each time the clock ticked past midnight, the bed creaked beneath me, as if it had a life of its own. The familiar pressure returned, the mattress dipping slightly at my feet or shifting beneath my back. Never the same spot twice, but always reminding me that I wasn't alone. One night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, the sensation came back, the touch. This time it was unmistakable. A hand, ice cold and damp, it closed slowly around my ankle. My skin prickled and goosebumps broke out across my limbs. The fingers were long, thin, and covered in something slick, like the residue of damp earth or moss. It didn't pull or squeeze. It didn't do anything but hold me, a quiet, terrifying presence that said it could take me if it wanted. My throat tightened, and I could barely breathe. I was frozen, trapped between panic and disbelief. After what felt like an eternity, the hand slid away quietly, disappearing beneath the bed like a shadow melting into darkness. The mattress creaked softly as the pressure lifted, and the room felt colder than before. I didn't move. I lay still, too scared to even blink, until the first rays of dawn began to seep through the curtains. When the sun finally broke through the window, the feeling of warmth returned to the room, but the memory of the hand lingered, crawling beneath my skin like a whisper of something deadly. The following days were a haze. I stopped eating properly, unable to focus on anything but the fear that clung to me. I researched, looking for stories, anything that might explain what was happening. Everyone wrote about monsters under the bed like childhood myths, but nothing prepared me for the reality. Something was living there, waiting in the dark. I knew I had to do something. I tried moving the bed away from the wall, pulling the frame out into the middle of the room. But even then, the strange noises didn't stop. The breathing remained, the shifting weight, the creeping smell. It followed me like a shadow with teeth. One night I decided to confront it. I took a flashlight and knelt down, shining the beam directly under the bed. The light revealed nothing but the usual mess of dust and forgotten clothes. But as I looked closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The floorboards beneath the bed had changed. The wood looked different, darker, almost like skin stretched too tight. It pulsed faintly, a slow, sick rhythm like a beating heart. My flashlight flickered, and when the beam steadied, the pulsing stopped. The floor was silent and still again. I stood up quickly, backing away with a sudden wave of nausea. The smell hit me full force, overwhelming and suffocating. I covered my mouth and ran from the room, slamming the door behind me. Even now, I can't explain what I saw, or what's under that bed. The mystery lingers, a silent threat waiting in the shadows, and sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, I still feel the touch of cold fingers curling around my ankle, reminding me that whatever it is, it's still there. I knew I couldn't stay another night. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to get out, to leave the room and maybe the house forever. That morning I packed a small bag, not caring what I left behind. The house felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were closing in, filled with unseen eyes watching my every move. I needed to see one last time, to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Before leaving, I lifted the bed skirt, expecting only dust and forgotten clutter beneath. But what I saw froze me in place. There was a hole, not a crack or a gap, but a perfect, smooth circle cut into the floor, right where the dark pulsing wood had been before. It was about the size of a dinner plate, the edges clean and unnaturally sharp, as if something had been carved out with surgical precision. The hole was completely black, deeper than any shadow I'd ever seen, an endless void that swallowed the light from my flashlight. The air near it was colder than the rest of the room, and the sour smell I'd come to dread was thickest there, clinging to the edges like a living thing. My heart pounded, and my hands trembled as I reached out, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Then, without warning, a pale arm shot out of the hole, thin and unnaturally long, covered with slick, wet skin that glistened under the flashlight's beam. The fingers were long and claw-like, curling into the air as if searching. My breath caught. I stumbled back, nearly falling over the bed as the arm retracted suddenly, disappearing beneath the floor as if it had never been there. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light, but the hole remained dark, silent, empty. The floor was solid again, unbroken and ordinary, with no sign that anything had moved beneath it. I wanted to leave, to shut the door and never look back, but something kept me rooted there. The silence was heavy, charged with a terrible promise. I could feel it watching me from that void, waiting. As I gathered my things, I heard it low, wet breathing, faint but unmistakable, coming from beneath the floorboards. It wasn't the slow, labored breath I'd heard before. This one was deeper, colder, filled with hunger. I didn't look back as I left the room. I didn't dare. But as I closed the door behind me, I felt the floor tremble faintly under my feet, as though whatever had been under the bed was shifting, preparing to reach out again. That night, in a hotel far away, I tried to convince myself it was over. But I still catch glimpses, shadows flickering just beyond my vision, cold spots in empty rooms, and sometimes, the faint, impossible sensation of cold fingers curling around my ankle, pulling me back to that room, that hole, that endless dark waiting just beneath the surface. And I know deep down the monster under the bed never really left. It's still there, patient, watching, waiting for me to come home.